All right, welcome to lesson 32. This is function outputs. So in math, it is important to be able to compute or identify the outputs of functions. Functions can be written as a verbal rule, an equation, a graph, or a table. So last lesson we looked at some verbal functions. Today we will focus more on equations, graphs, and tables. When functions are expressed in tables, equations, or graphs, the x values are the inputs. This is super important. We're going to highlight this. The x values, okay, are the inputs, and the y values are the outputs. This is something that you're going to have to remember, something that's super important, and will continue on for the rest of your math career. So let's look at example number 1. It says a function is given by the following graph. So we're given a function on a graph. So this red lines and points, this all is considered the function, okay? So let's answer some of these questions. It says, what is the output when the input is 1? Okay, so some of this verbiage can get confusing, so let's highlight it, all right? X values are the inputs. So if I'm looking for an input, that means I'm looking for an X value. And if I'm looking for an output, I'm looking for a Y value. So I'm gonna, at least for this first one, sort of color code it so we can remind ourselves exactly what they're asking for here. Eventually, you'll just remember input X, output Y, input X, output Y, okay? So what is the output? So they're looking for what is the Y value when the input or the X is 1. So I'm looking for, on my graph here, I'm looking for an X value of 1, which would be right here, right? Somewhere on this line, which if I keep going up, it's right here, this point, right? So there you want to know what the output is. The output is the Y value. Well, this point is 1, 4. So my Y value is 4. Okay? So this is kind of how you would go about this if you were answering these questions about a graph. All right, let's look at number 2. What is the output? Again, they're looking for the Y value. Okay, they're looking for the Y value when the input or the X value is -2. So I'm looking at -2 on the X axis. Here it is. Okay, I'm looking for where that crosses, where the function is on that line. It's at this point right here. And what is this point? It's -2, 1. -2, 1. So they're looking for the Y value. That's this 1 right here. So my answer for number 2 is a 1. Okay. All right, let's look at number 3. What is the input? Okay, now they're looking for the X value when the output was 3. So I'm looking for a Y value of 3. So on my Y axis, remember that's your vertical axis, I'm looking for 3. That's this right here. And I'm noticing the graph crosses Y equals 3 at 2 spots. So I actually have 2 answers for this, okay? One answer is not sufficient. 2 answers for this because my graph, this red line, crosses Y equals 3, the horizontal line I just made, okay? Y equals 3 at 2 different spots. So there are 2 spots in this function that have an output of 3. Both of those X values are necessary for the answer to number 3. So let's look at what the X values would be. This point is 0, 3. And let's side note, there isn't an actual point made, like they didn't make a red point here, but this line crosses at this nice, easy, they could have put a point here, okay? They could have put a point here, they just didn't. Maybe I'll put one here so that it makes it more understandable that this is a point on this function, okay? And this point is 0, 6, okay? So, not 6, 0, 3. All right, so that's the first input, okay? So 0 is one of the possibilities for the answer to number 3, but we also have this other one over here, which is 4, 3. Okay, so functions could have 2 different inputs, have the same output, okay? All right, so 0 and 4. This is just a little symbol for and. It's really, really sloppy. But usually it looks a little bit better. That looks a little bit better, okay? So 0 and 4 are both inputs that would give you an output of 3 for this function. Okay, last question, and then we'll move on to the next page. What is the input, or what input created the greatest output for this function? So remember, inputs are x's. outputs are y's. Greatest means largest, right? So I'm looking for what created or what input would be placed into this function. Remember we talked about last lesson that functions are like computers, right? So an x value is put into this function, into this computer, and out spits out some printing, some output, right? In this case, it's a y value. So which y value is the largest is what we're trying to look for on this graph. So the largest y values go up and down, right? So the largest one would be the one that goes the highest. So the highest point on this graph is this point right here. And they want to know what is the input when the greatest output is happening. So which x value gives us the largest y? Well, it's 1, right? This is an x of 1. 1, 4 is our point. That's the highest point on this function. So our input that created the largest output for y is 1. Okay? I'll see you guys in the next video.